And now, live from beautiful Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, you're watching My Fellow Americans with your host, Spike Cohen.
Hi, and welcome to my very first podcast of My Fellow Americans with me, Spike Cohen. This was originally going to be live streamed, but that didn't happen because I don't know how to use a computer. But I thank you for watching this. And so I want to thank Matt and Mohammed for this opportunity to start podcasting. It's something I've considered for a long time, but they gave me that push to start doing it and start having a weekly show, so I'm really excited about that. I got to give a shout out to Tehran Turks' mom and him. Just to kind of explain what this show is about, I think my friend Philo Beto explained it best. This is a Hebrew, hip-hop, ANCAP, salsa, and dog grooming podcast. And basically, it's going to be kind of all over the place, but the show is pretty much going to be me kind of sharing my political views as they relate to current events and having on guests to talk about it. So it's going to be pretty cool. I'm going to kind of probably figure out what I'm doing as I go, and so I'm excited about that. For those who don't know, I am an anarchist, which means that I believe that government is unnecessary and harmful. I think that services are best received through a free market that is unfettered by force from competing providers who provide services to you at giving you the best value. When we try to get services, whether it's security or roads or healthcare or food or whatever else, we may think that that whatever types of services that we need, when we get it from government, we're getting it from a violent monopoly that is financed by theft and that uses threats of violence to enforce itself. And it's odd to think that you would be able to get good services from an organization like that, as opposed to people that are competing with each other to try to get your business. So that's what my worldview is, and that's kind of where we're going to go with the show. And so without further ado, my guest is the host of the Lou Sanders Show and an occasional host of the Freedom Fiends radio show. He appears as a guest on a number of radio shows and podcasts, including this one. He is also an organizer and promoter of the Midwest Peace and Liberty Fest, which is an annual weekend-long libertarian festival that's in Michigan. His website is lousandersshow.com. I'm very excited to have him on. And so without further ado, here is my good friend, Lou Sanders. Lou, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be here on your inaugural episode, and it's no accident that I use the word inaugural.
Yes, we're going to use very, very heavy political terminology we're going to use on the show.
Yeah, and it is the 4th of July. So, rebel scum, if you do not like British law or the king's taxes, then you can move to Somalia.
Exactly. You got to back the red. If you don't back the red, then, next time that you need someone to tax your tea, call a crackhead.
Yeah. If you don't have a thin red line bumper sticker on the back of your carriage, the next time Indians come into your neighborhood, you're on your own.
Exactly.
Our redcoats won't be riding for 3 days to come to your rescue.
Exactly.
And the response time has not improved much since the 1700s.
No, that's the thing. Like, you would think with cars that would be better than horse carts, but it's pretty much that good solid 5 to 30 minutes on average. So you'd think they would have worked on that. But again, when you don't have competition, why would you? So I'm really happy to have you on. There are many reasons that I chose to have you come on as my first guest. Number one, you were available. That was a big one. The fact that you could.
I'm easy.
Yeah, so that was a big one. The biggest reason is you are one of the people who really forced me to challenge my belief system. I was very much a libertarian. Possibly even just a libertarian-leaning conservative. I was very big about the Constitution, and we have to obey the Constitution, and we need to we need a government that protects us, protects our rights and all of those things, and debating with you on social media. And having you really challenge that and basically just saying, like, have you read the Constitution? And my initial response, I don't think I ever actually called you a libtard, but that was those are the types of thoughts I was having, like this guy, what's his problem? Why doesn't he support this? And it really kind of probably to prove you wrong, I went on to went online and actually read the Constitution, not just the Bill of Rights, but actually the all of
the 7 articles.
The 7 articles, and really just Article 1 was enough. And I thought, oh wow, holy crap, this is not about my freedom at all. This is about robbing me and finding loopholes to imprison me without any reason, and and then reading about the history of it and everything else, about how how a lot of the people that were involved in the revolution were very much against the Constitution, and that the Bill of Rights was really just lip service that was added to get them to sign on to it. And it really kind of changed my belief system, and I sort of reread Human Action, and then I read some Spooner and some Stirner and things like that, and it really kind of forced me into that. So I credit you in a major way to that, and I thank you for it.
Well, thanks. It's nice to have somebody not call me a libtard and actually pay attention to what I say. There's a meme. I love talking about memes because memes are the digital bumper stickers moving up and down the information superhighway.
Right. Yeah.
There's a meme, and I've made a couple versions of it. One is the redneck guy, and he's just a mess. And he's got his red, white, and blue flag bathing suit or whatever on in his shirt, and I pledge allegiance to your clothing. And then he's got his two ugly toothless redneck women on his arm, and it says, when the anarchists are talking about stuff that you don't even understand and you're just waiting for the first opportunity to shout libtard or MAGA.
Or MAGA, yeah.
Yeah, and what that really comes down to is most people don't really have a belief system. They have an ideology, but not a belief system.
Right.
And by ideology, I guess I probably should say faith a little bit more than an ideology.
Yeah, there's not much praxis behind what it is they believe.
Yeah, they operate on the faith that the Constitution is a good thing. It must be because the guy at the bar the guy that sits at the end of the bar that goes to the campaign for a tiny bit more liberty meetings every month, he thinks it's a good thing. He hasn't read it either, but he heard it from somebody else. And it's where a slogan or talking point takes on a life of its own and becomes truth in the mind of the believers.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And mine was very much a belief system. I think it was, obviously it was flawed, but it was based on my perception of foundational things that I really hadn't challenged. People had told me it, and I believed it, and I moved forward from there. And then once it was really challenged, it made me rethink everything that I believed. Well,
things to really take into consideration with this, and the faith belief system that goes behind this. Well, the religion, the religious faith that goes behind the founding fathers. I refer to them as the founding fathers on occasion, sometimes the founding lawyers. And when we look at John Adams having people incarcerated for calling him his rotundity, that's when I switched to the founding Führers, because that did happen under the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Right.
Of course, the reason behind it was because there was war that was impending with France, and there were concerns that the French would be meddling in U.S. internal affairs and everything else, and this, that, and the other thing, and all these different reasons. And they came up with this justification. It's kind of like one of the very first public arrests made under the Patriot Act, with the expansion of police investigative powers and everything else. It wasn't about taking down a terrorist cell in Dearborn or New York City or something like that. It was taking down some good fellows in New Jersey with their strip club.
Right, exactly. And that was, that was something that was big with me, because when for example, when they pass one every year, but when the NDAA was passed a few years ago, that allowed for warrantless wiretapping and holding people without warrant.
Oh, yes, the indefinite detention provision of NDAA 2012.
Right, and so, a lot of people were saying that's unconstitutional because of the Habeas Corpus Act, and I said, or Habeas Corpus Clause, and I said, by then I realized it was perfectly constitutional, because it says in the Habeas Corpus Clause that if and I forget, I think it's
Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2. It says the privilege of habeas corpus shall not be suspended except in times of foreign
war and
invasion or domestic rebellion.
yeah, and not just that.
That's not an exact quote, but that's pretty darn close.
Well, and it actually ends in something along the lines of conditions that may require it. So they left it very wide open. I mean, you talk about the founding lawyers. I mean, there was some serious weasel wording there where when, Abraham Lincoln suspended it, when it's basically been indefinitely suspended now, whenever they want to use it, it's fully within the Constitution. The Constitution is a document that is written that presumes to give government the authority to rob us, kidnap us, and murder us as it sees fit. And any of the amendments past that are essentially window dressing because those articles are the founding articles, so that those things come before anything else. So that was a major realization for me, and I get it's why I don't get upset when people call me names when I say these things, because that was my reaction. That how dare you say something about essentially what was my faith in government.
Well, let's take it a step further. I think the only real complaint about that Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2 indefinite detention provision that was used in NDAA 2012 is, I believe, I may be wrong on this, but it may be listed as a congressional power versus a presidential power. And with the provision in NDAA 2012, the Congress has granted that power to the president without actually amending the magic parchment.
Right.
So,
but never whether they could do it or not. It was just the means by which they were doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And most people don't know about that clause in there. And there's something else, Article 4, Section 2, Clause 3, I believe it is, or Section 3, Clause 2. I can't remember. To me, it's all a palindrome. That's the Fugitive Slave Clause of the Constitution. Now, you mentioned weasel words, and the founding lawyers did not mention slavery at all in the Constitution at all. Mm. They used euphemisms like persons held to service or labor.
Right.
So in that regard, somebody that's reading it today that has absolutely no idea of the context, like let's say the typical so-called small government Republican or LP person, particularly if they're brand new to it, they're like, okay, I'm going to start loving me some Constitution.
Right.
And they start off reading "We the People," blah, blah, blah. And they start getting into the technical stuff. They're like, too long, didn't read. Let me just skip ahead to let's skip ahead to the good part here. First
Shall
Amendment.
not be infringed. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So really the belief in the Constitution falls in the category of constitutional idolatry.
Right.
Because they're looking at it as a holy symbol, and they are worshiping it as such. And quite frankly, if you read through it, it's particularly Articles 1 through 7. It's hard to see where anybody would come up with the idea that there's liberty in there.
Yeah.
Particularly where it says, the very first two clauses in Article 1, Section 8 are the power to tax and the power to run up a national debt, right, which will be paid with the power to tax.
Right, which is enforced with the power to do whatever else they want to do it. I like your meme and I shared it once, where it was just a napkin, which was colored similar to the Constitution, but it said, it says, right, what does it say?
I have the right to rob you because it says so on this napkin.
Right, on this here napkin. And I love it because when people say, well, that's totally different, and I say, why? And they'll say, well, because that's just something you wrote on. I'm like, yeah, but the Constitution is just something that someone wrote on. The only difference between that napkin and the Constitution is that there are people who are willing to kill for the Constitution. I haven't had an opportunity yet to convince people to kill and rob and use whatever violence or threats of violence are necessary to enforce my napkin. But in terms of any moral authority to do those things, that napkin doesn't have any more authority than the Constitution has. And that's, that was, and again, it was a major change for me because I don't think we were actually Facebook friends before I had made this change, but I was very much into the Constitution. And it was only, I like when you share some of your old posts from 4 or 5 years ago, it's similar to how I was, that, we need to just follow the Constitution and everything will be fine. And and it was a major change for me that it was a belief system. It was it wasn't a belief system. It was a religion. It was a faith that had saints. It had articles of faith, the flag, the anthem, the pledge, and the emotional reactions that people have to someone not treating that anthem or pledge or not seeing their saints, the founders, in the same way that they do. They have this in many cases, I know a lot of American Christians who get a lot more upset about you not, respecting the pledge than they do about you not, respecting a hymn or a call to prayer for, at their service. They're way more invested in their patriotism than in their religious faith.
Well, the second commandment of the Church of Statism is the right to keep and bear false gods or idols shall not be infringed.
Exactly, exactly. So before we go much further, I want to get a chance for you to talk about your stuff. As I had said before, you're the host of the Lusander Show, and you occasionally host the Freedom Fiends radio show. Tell me a little bit about that, about what got you started with that, and sort of your format, and the types of things you do on that show.
Well, let's start with the beginning. The Freedom Fiends was my first podcast that I'd ever listened to, ever. Mm-hmm. The very first one, and I had I saw Michael had posted it to somebody else's wall. That's back in the time of walls, before timelines. And I'm like, this is interesting. And I think it was somebody that was affiliated with the Mises Institute. And I was still rather new to libertarianism, anarcho-capitalism, market anarchism, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And I saw it and I'm like, let me listen to this. Oh, wait, I have to download? No, that's scary. But anyway, I wound up listening to it on my computer. So I just hit play on the webpage and it's like, hey, wow, this is rather interesting. Holy cow. And I already started embracing the ideas of anarchism. We can get into the roots of that a little bit more after this story here. But I listened to it. I'm like, wow, this is pretty neat. And I listened to a few more episodes. And this was back in the early days. This is back when it was a podcast. It wasn't even on LRN yet. As a matter of fact, this is back in the days of doing double enders, where they would each record their segment over Skype, but they would record it on Audacity. One would send their copy to the other and then sew it together in Audacity.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we're talking early podcasting primitive days.
Right. Yeah.
And then eventually more equipment got added, mixers and the ability to record stuff. But anyway, I sent a friend request to Michael W. Dean, who was the head hamster of sorts at the time, and Nima Vedati, who, well, I guess they were both founding fiends. So I don't know that there was one fiend that was higher up on the hierarchy. But anyway, I sent them both friend requests, and I just started catching up on the backlog of the early episodes and started learning hearing the new ones when they came out. And Michael had put out a request that said that he was looking for somebody to be an admin on the Facebook page for the Freedom Fiends show. So I jumped at it. I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, I'll get on this. I'll do it. Right. So there I was posting memes, cat memes, anarchy memes, all sorts of different stuff. And I got a chance to interact with the audience that followed the Facebook page and everything else.
Right.
And eventually the Fiends website expanded and a blog was added. And Michael sent me an email that says, hey, would you like to be a blogger on the Fiend blog? I'm like, okay, that's cool.
Right.
And also I'd done I think we may have been at the point of where they were on LRN, or they may have been doing some live streaming. So this is pretty early in
it was like early foundational stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, this is like 2012, 2013, something like that. Maybe even part of 2011. But anyway, I started writing blog posts on there, and I did a number of them that were quite well received and got shared in quite a few places. But Michael had asked me to do that, and I did some Fiend in the Field reporting. As an example, I did a live report. The first one that I think I did was from, I don't know if you are familiar about this, but it was Baker's Green Acres. The farmer's name was Mark Baker, and he was here in Michigan, over in the west side of the state, kind of over by Traverse City area and Cadillac a little bit. So if you're holding up your left hand and looking at it with your thumb to the right, it would probably be like the knuckle below your pinky finger.
Oh, that's right, because this is Michigan. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, it's over in that area there. But I'd gone up there because there was a big court case going on, and the court case just kind of fizzled like they usually do. Most court cases, people think they're going to go in, they're going to get justice.
Right.
No, they're going to get a bunch of postponements, and things are going to get pushed over. They're going to go and make a couple motions. It's really a big giant waste of time. As far as shakedown schemes go, it's probably the least efficient shakedown in the history of all humanity. And there are crackheads that will have you in and out in less than 30 seconds, but the government can't accomplish that. Oh, and the crackhead will leave you alone after he gets
exactly.
the
There's not going to be several months of procedural delays with the crackhead. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he may catch you again like a couple months later and try to rob you, but it's not going to be planned.
Right, exactly.
But anyway, so we did a live broadcast and interview from his house, and what was really cool, and I think this got a lot more publicity on it, was the first hour and a half of the show was Ben Swan, back when he was, I think he had just left Fox 19 and was starting to go off and do independent stuff.
Oh, okay, okay.
So Ben Swan was the opening act for the interview with Mark Baker, and then I got a little chance to rant on there. And I'm pretty sure that was me getting my my radio fiend in the field cherry popped. So cool. Anyway, after that, we did about a month or so later, we did a live broadcast for the first hour of the show on LRN from what was it? The very first annual Midwest Peace and Liberty Fest. And Ben Stone, the Bad Quaker, was there from badquaker.com. And he had all his audio gear, and we went and we were in his motorhome. We did the first hour or so and got a chance to talk in the microphones and be heard by all the LRN listeners.
Cool. So that's see, I didn't realize you weren't one of the original Freedom Fiends. I assumed that was something you and Michael and Jeremy and so on had started. I didn't realize you were a newcomer to the Freedom Fiends.
I'm one of the oldest serving fiends. There were people that were guest hosts before me because they had microphones that were set up already.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting how you wind up on the Fiends. You don't just fill out like an application to become a host.
Right.
You get noticed, or you send an email asking a question. As an example, Diana Kyler, she had sent a email to Michael, and it was on the subject of AA, because I guess she knew somebody that was dealing with her, something like that. And then Michael is very open with the fact that he's been in AA in the past, and he's a recovering alcoholic and heroin addict.
Right.
So she was talking about the AA model and some other things. So she came on as a guest for like an hour or maybe even a full episode. I don't remember, but this is back in the old days. And eventually the show went from just weekends on LRN and weekends on LRN and GCN up to there was a weeknight show.
Oh, wow.
But this was on at 1 a.m. Eastern time. So that started off as Michael Dean After Dark, and then it just transitioned to be the Freedom Fiends, and it was all fiends all the time. So I was one of the original co-hosts on the new show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Randy England had done like a guest spot on the original Fiends on the weekends. Diana had been on there. And my first episode, I was on there. It went pretty well, and I was rather nervous because I'd never done anything more than just calling in. So here I am using fancy equipment, and I have to have stuff to discuss. I have to say intelligent things so that people don't turn off the radio.
Right.
And
that's what I'm working on is saying intelligent things so that people listen to my podcast. So
yeah,
I will.
Fake it till you make it. Pretend if you can't be smart. If you can't be smart, pretend to be smart. But anyway,
pretend real hard. Yeah.
So the first episode went fine, and then the second episode, somehow or another, Michael had lost internet out in Wyoming. There were like really bad windstorms. So he says, "So you want to do the show by yourself?" I'm like, "By myself?" Because when you're doing a show by yourself, and especially if it's on live radio, if you're doing a podcast that you're just recording, you're going to put out later, no problem. You can go back and you can take out the hums and ahs, the sneezes, the, hey, cat, get off of that furniture there.
Someone walking into the room and saying something to you or whatever. Yeah.
The SWAT team raid, whatever it is. You can always take that out later. You can always take out the pauses. In Audacity, there's this thing called truncate, and it will take out all the long pauses. Now, if you're doing pause for effect, it'll impact that also. But
Right.
it is what it is. It's a way of tightening things up. But anyway,
Cool.
you can
Cool.
always go back and edit it. Now, when you're on the radio and you have to do 12 and a half minutes of audio, you have to sound intelligent. And if the alarm goes, or I'm sorry, if you have more than 5 seconds of silence, soon as you have 6 seconds of silence registered, there is an alarm at the network that will be going off, and board ops people, I don't know, the geek SWAT team will be scrambling to find out what's going
Oh
on
my
because there's
gosh.
silence. And I have visited GCN studios. I was at a festival a few years ago, and I stopped there on the way back. I got the tour, got some swag, and got to meet the studio dog too, because I got this little dog that runs around the studio.
That's funny.
But anyway, I got to see the operation in there. And there was a time where something wasn't set up properly, and they had the 6 seconds of silence, and you heard the whoop whoop whoop. It's not like the lights went down, the regular lights went out, and the red light started spinning
Right,
like
when
in
the generator
like
didn't come
war.
on. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
There was no call to battle stations or anything like that. It was just a little alarm went off,
Right,
kind of like a
right.
timer. But anyway.
That's
So yes, you have to do a 12 and a half or like a 6 minute segment of speaking constantly. But I was also the first one to do a solo show, and that came about from my co-host that was scheduled for the night not showing up until there was 8 segments on the show, and he showed up for the 7th and 8th segment. So basically I started off with, oh God, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And the board op is like, well, you better figure it out because you're going live right about now.
oh
And then the
no.
music comes in. So I had to fake it till I made it. But rather than freaking out and losing my mind, I persevered. I kept going,
Right.
and I did solo shows after that, planned solo shows. And after I did it, a few others did it.
Wow. That's awesome. And so then how did you, what got you, why did you decide to start your own show with the Lusander show?
Well, as much as I really enjoy doing live radio, the I'd always wanted to do some of my own stuff, and the doing the live radio on the Fiends kind of, I use it as an excuse to not be as proactive on my own stuff as I should have been.
I can't do this. I have to do the Freedom Fiends. Yeah.
Well, also, like what you're going through right now, you're having technical problems today. There's a lot of stuff that I did not know,
Right, right, right,
and
right.
and quite frankly, I didn't really know how to figure it out. So between that and plus regular life and everything else, I did an awful lot of procrastination. Then finally I knuckled down and said, look, I got an awful lot of really good content here that
Right.
I'm not going to need to take care of. I need to put it out there. It needs to get released. It's very good stuff. I want to get this stuff going, and I want to have my own show.
Right.
I'm going to keep doing the Freedom Fiends, but I want to have my own show and put something out there that works for me. That's a reflection of me,
Yeah.
100%.
Cool, cool.
So I did that, and the first 5 episodes that I have are interviews that I did from last year at the 5th annual Midwest Peace and Liberty Fest. And this year, I didn't get very many interviews. I think last year I had a total of maybe 14 or 15, and I combined some of them together because some of them were pretty short. This year, I only have about 5 or 6. So when I get around to editing those, I'll start posting those up. But I still have a bunch from last year that I have to put out. And then I also want to do a lot of my own content. As far as the type of content that I'm going to put out there, a lot of it's going to be partly reflective of the conversation that we're having here today. Okay, so how did you get to this point of,
Right.
I don't believe in the Constitution? Well, I read it. And what I'll be doing is I'll be putting out a lot of ideas and concepts out there. As an example, one of the things that you brought up as a possible topic for today would be the Supreme Court.
Right.
Well, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? My rule of law. Our mutual friend Paul Gordon, his big sticking point to crossing over,
Mhm.
and I'm going to take a little credit. I'm his anarchy daddy, just like I'm your anarchy
Oh,
daddy,
okay. Well,
so to
good. That's
speak.
good to know. Okay.
Yeah, and he'll be the first to admit this and tell you that too. One of his big things was trying to get over that hurdle of the rule of law. So when you look at the Supreme Court and people talk about, oh, but the Supreme Court is going to determine this, that, and the other thing. If the rule of law was actually the rule of law and not the rule of men and women, most of whom are completely insignificant, and I'm speaking of the so-called lawmakers. Let's go a little bit further. What exactly is the law to you? Put on your minarchist dunce cap and tell me what the law is to you, Spike.
Oh man, minarchist don't cap. The
Well,
law.
actually, min statist is the proper term.
Right, just the tip. Yeah. Only the tip of government. Laws are rules that are written. It sounds silly now because I don't believe any of this crap. Laws are written to control to create order in a society that would be unable to have order without it.
Right. Most people, and they may not enunciate this belief that I'm about to share with you, but most people see what you and I refer to as the law
Mhm.
as an entity of its own.
Okay.
When they hear the rule of law, they're thinking that the law is the kind and just ruler, and that
Right.
the
Right.
law determines what is right. And they're taking out the fact that what they refer to as the law is actually the opinions, declarations, edicts, commands, and threats of idiot politicians. So the law is not some separate entity unto itself, brought down from the mountaintop on stone tablets,
Exactly. It's not an objective
created by,
thing at all. Yeah.
created by a higher power.
Right.
It's the opinions of a bunch of idiots in DC.
That we
It's
hate, that we all
yeah,
hate. No one likes
yeah,
politicians, but then we have to follow the
that they
law.
hate.
Yep, exactly. Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So from there, we take a look at, okay, so this is the law, and it's really not this divine thing. It's just it's no different than the napkin that you mentioned earlier.
Right, right, right.
Okay, the only difference between the napkin and the Constitution is the belief of status that there is a difference between the two.
Right.
So here's the thing. If the law was completely solid and or objective and it had a particular meaning, the question is, why are Supreme Court decisions, or actually, let me rephrase, opinions,
Yep.
and that's what they are.
No, I
is
know. There are opinions. Yep.
Yeah. So why are these opinions all so often 5-4,
Yep.
6-3? Why are there so many split decisions if the meaning of the Constitution is clear?
Yep. Yep. It wouldn't be arbitrary. It wouldn't be up to that level of. I mean, even within science, there's some, there's consensus, but there may be dissenting opinions. But there would be at least. There would be more often that it would be either unanimous or close to unanimous. It wouldn't be constantly split along partisan lines of determining how it should be. Because like you said, it's entirely arbitrary. They're reading it and saying, how can I make this work the way I want it to work, as opposed to this, like you said, the idea of the law being its own freestanding thing that, that is protecting us or doing whatever it's supposed to do. It's this entity that we are allowed to harness, in all of its benevolence.
Exactly. So the laws are always subject to the interpretation of the interpreters.
Right. Yep.
Okay. It's the opinion of the interpreters. It's subject to their biases, their belief system, their experiences, their lack of experience, their ignorance, their fears, and their other emotions. It is subject to their triggering.
Yep. How triggered they are by whatever the subject is. Well, like right now, everyone's debating, how's this person going to feel about, this next Supreme Court justice, how are they going to feel about abortion? And it's like, well, if the rule of law was this, like we were just talking about, if it's this subjective thing, it wouldn't even matter. And I do agree with minarchists and conservatives when they say, well, if government was smaller, then who the next Supreme Court justice is, or who the next president is, wouldn't matter as much. And that's true, but I think what they're missing is that all statism, all government is a progressive disease, and how how authoritarian or how oppressive or how in debt or how how horrible your government is just an extension of how far along the line it's progressed. Any government is eventually going to progress to totalitarianism until something happens to push back and force it back into another role. But it's constantly trying to progress. On its own, it's not going to stay within a certain, the proof being our government, the U.S. government started with the.
What do you mean our?
The government that cooperate with me here a little bit. The government that presumes authority over the landmass in which we're all living in this moment.
You mean the enemy occupation?
Yes, the enemy occupation of my house is. It started with the Articles of Confederation, which is as laissez-faire of a government document as I've ever read. I mean, they didn't even have the power to tax. They didn't have the power to they basically had to ask the states to give them money. It was such a weak central government. They didn't have there was no executive figurehead. There was no, I believe they didn't even have the power to form armies.
Figurehead is the proper term for the executive, because essentially it was like the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Right.
So the president under the Articles of Confederation was one of the other representatives, and his job was to kind of like be in charge of the proceedings.
Right, but so he was the president of the Congress, who also was the one.
Right.
But he wasn't.
Right.
It wasn't a separate branch. Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, this was a very hands-off, or as close to hands-off as I've read of an actual government, and it has progressed to what we have now. So for someone to say, it's just like when a communist says, well, that wasn't real communism, and communism would work if people would just cooperate with it. That's the same thing that constitutionalists are saying. Well, the Constitution would work if we just abided by it. Well, we are abiding by it because, as you said, it's all subjective anyway, and the Supreme Court has determined everything that's happening is constitutional. And B, even if it wasn't, it's one of two things: either the Constitution has created what we're experiencing, or it has allowed it to be created, in which case it's either a bad thing or a useless thing. But it's not helping us in our liberty in any way.
Well, let's take a little step further back. And for people that are saying, what in the happy Halloween are these two talking about? I've never heard about this sort of thing.
Right.
What do you mean that the Constitution was a coup, the coup of 1787?
Right.
I'm going to recommend a friend of mine to them. It's a Dangerous History podcast, profcj.org or dangeroushistory.com, something like that. If you do a Google search of Dangerous History podcast, you'll find it.
Okay.
And CJ Kilmer is a college history professor. And the definition of dangerous history is it's stuff that steps outside of the Overton window. And the Overton window is what is considered mainstream enough to be allowable opinion.
Right.
The example that Tom Woods always gives is you can debate on whether the top marginal tax rate should be 34% or 38%. But if you say 40 or 20, then you're
insane.
You're absolutely bat-Schumer crazy. So with this here, it provides a lot of the history. Now, there's a lot of people that believe that the founding lawyers had the purest of intentions. So let's go by what you had just talked about with the Articles of Confederation. And I'm not as knowledgeable on the Constitution as a lot of people are, but I think a lot of that knowledge that they have is the wrong knowledge. And I wish that my knowledge rivaled their faith in the Constitution, but it doesn't. So here's the question: the whole purpose, and I'm going to describe this with a meme. The what was it? The Federalist Papers, largely written by Hamilton, and who were the others? I think John Jay, and I can't remember the third, who was a major one. Incidentally,
Hamilton's the one I always think of when they talk about Federalist Papers.
Yeah, Publius. Interestingly enough, he wrote under a pseudonym promoting the Constitution that he was a proponent of. So he had introduced it, and then he had written his own review. So that would kind of like using a sock account on eBay to give yourself good reviews.
Or like when Trump would call people as John Barron or whatever, and say how rich he was, and all the supermodels he had had sex with or whatever.
Yeah, but anyway, so here's the question, and I regard the Federalist Papers and the false promises in there as the 18th century version of, if you like your freedom from an overbearing central government, you can keep
Right.
your freedom from an overbearing central government, because they talked about all these things, that how things would happen, how things would not happen, and quite frankly, they got most of it backwards. And now the question is, was that by design or was that by accident? Did they have the purest of intentions and things just went wrong? Or were they just lying and getting people to accept the Constitution, considering that the the camel's nose under the tent?
Right.
And as
Right.
an example, at the convention, what was it? Hamilton had proposed the assumption of the state's remaining war debt for it to be nationalized.
Right.
And it went nowhere at the convention, but that's one of the very first things that happened as after he was the Secretary of the Treasury.
Right. Was
So,
how are we going to pay this debt? Yeah.
well, the thing is, the states were paying their own debt, and I believe Virginia had already paid off its debt in its entirety by the time the Constitution was ratified. Now, the Constitution was a response to Shays' so-called rebellion. How much do you know about Shays' rebellion?
I've probably less than you.
Okay. All right. There's a nice podcast on there as part of the Revolutionary Aftershocks and the American Revolution series on Dangerous History podcast. What had happened in Massachusetts, and this was out on the frontier. I believe Boston was the capital, and that was over on the coast and everything. So you had out in the frontier people. There was a lot less population out there, and plus
Right.
with the distance, so they felt that they were not represented.
Mm-hmm.
So what wound up happening was the state legislature, which incidentally, John Adams had been a part of the writing the Constitution for that. So John Adams is definitely a recidivist in statism.
Right.
But anyway, they had tried to accelerate the repayment of the war debt, the war bonds.
Right.
Okay. Now, the so-called rebels were not protesting having to pay back the debt. They were protesting having to pay it back at an accelerated rate. They were also protesting that the requirement was for the tax to be paid in specie, meaning it had to be paid in the hard currency.
Right.
And there was no hard currency on the frontier at the time. You could have said you have to pay for it in unicorn tusks and
It wouldn't have mattered. Right. Right.
and Martian brains.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Those things were not there. So there was absolutely no way on God's green earth that they could have paid the war debt in specie, because it did not exist.
Right. Right.
It's like saying you have to pay the war debt in limited government. So these people, many of whom were war veterans, and incidentally, many of the war veterans that did their time in this war for American independence never even got paid for their service. They didn't get paid at all, or they only got paid for a tiny portion of it. But here these people come home from fighting for independence, and they get slapped with the bill for their independence.
For what they just did. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, for what they just did and did not get paid for.
Yep. Yep. But they get slapped with the bill for covering the munitions cost or whatever else. Yeah.
Yeah, the war bonds cost. Now, something else. Because they did not get paid while they were in the military, many of them had bought war bonds back in the early days. They had to sell their war bonds. Now, because it was suspected that the war bonds would not be paid back, that's what the public perception was.
Right, right.
There were certain politically connected bankster types that bought up these war bonds for a fraction of the face value. Yeah, for pennies on the dollar.
And then insisted to the politicians that they be paid in full, which is what the whole nationalizing the cost was about.
Right.
Yep.
But the thing is, they were operating on inside information that these bonds would be paid in full, at full face value. And the Assumption Act was actually the first bankster bailout in United States history.
It was the first TARP, was right at the beginning. That's funny. But that's the thing. So, I mean, that and obviously we're not taught that. But those were the things that, reading about it. One of my biggest I guess I could say idols, because I mean a lot of it is in some ways a form of idolatry, was Patrick Henry, and his whole struggle during the war for independence. When I really started drilling down on the history of the Anti-Federalists and things like that, to see that someone who I identified with more in terms of his struggle than, for example, a George Washington or a Hamilton or a Franklin, he didn't agree with the Constitution.
He spoke loudly against it
Yeah.
at the Virginia ratifying conventions.
Right, exactly.
I believe he was one of the authors of the Anti-Federalist
Yep.
Papers.
Yeah, he was.
And
Yeah.
the Anti-Federalists, they looked at the Constitution and they predicted with brilliant and amazing accuracy
Yep.
what would happen if the Constitution were to be ratified.
Yep.
They should be completely vindicated by history. Now, the problem is the so-called small government conservatives out there, like Paul Ryan, that only want to slow the increase in the growth of
Right,
government,
right.
not actually shave it back.
Right.
No, I saw this on a Glenn Beck. What's this thing? The Blaze.
Yeah,
I saw this on. Yeah, I saw this on his website, and they're the so-called small government conservatives. They were quoting the Anti-Federalist Papers and talking about taxation and everything else, and they assumed that the taxation was only about the income tax, or that the Anti-Federalist Papers were only about that, and it wasn't. It was,
it was any tax.
Yeah. So they're thinking that these are small government conservatives like them that support the Constitution, but they're just worried about this. No, they were opposed to the Constitution because of the contents of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah, they wanted the federal government, quote unquote, to be little more than just an organizer between the states to make sure they didn't break into war with one another, and maintain commerce and agreement between them. They didn't want someone that was they didn't want a centralized military or border immigration enforcement or any of that. I mean, they didn't even the idea of those things was completely foreign to them.
Well, let's take a look at that. So you said to stop war between the several states, correct?
Right.
Okay, and that sounds to me like a very good argument.
Right.
That sounds like something that we would want to have to maintain commerce, to make sure that they engage in trade with each other,
right.
even force them to engage in trade with each other if they have to. But the thing is that trade happened. That sounds like a good thing too, right?
That trade happened?
Yeah, and that one state doesn't put all these giant tariffs on another to punish them, through protectionism and all this other stuff, right?
Right.
Okay, and what else did you say they were looking for?
That was pretty much it. That they just sort of maintain relations between the states. That was the theory behind why the Articles of Confederation, what they actually wanted the federal government to do.
Okay, so those are pretty good things. Make sure that rights are protected and everything else. So if this is good for 13 separate nations, then why wouldn't it be good for like a couple hundred separate nations today? Why not a world government?
Or three, exactly.
Why not a single central government to make sure that the countries in Africa don't have genocide on their people, to make sure that trade happens and that it's fair for everybody else, make sure that there's a government to keep the economy going,
No, exactly.
Well, why not? Why not?
Well, and that's where the Anti-Federalists were wrong. They still wanted statism. They just wanted an even smaller statism than the Federalist one.
I don't know that the Anti-Federalists were even supporting that much.
Oh, okay. Well, then, and maybe it was different. I know specifically Patrick Henry. He supported the Articles of Confederation. That was his. Yeah.
Yeah, I personally think that the Articles of Confederation created too strong of a central government. But here's the thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so if you have to worry about these small governments going to war with each other, and you have to worry about these small governments messing with trade, then how is creating a bigger government more of a solution?
Well, exactly.
So it's the same nonsense that saying that the free market failed in healthcare because of all these different government interventions, and then coming up with Obamacare to solve all those other problems that were created by previous government intervention.
Exactly. Well, so, and you took it to in one direction. If having a central government is good, why not a one world government? Going in the other direction, if having smaller decentralized government is good, why not have 7 billion smaller decentralized governments of each individual making choices for themselves?
Exactly, because it's not really decentralized until all power rests with the individual.
Exactly.
People talk about state powers. Oh, okay. Are the constitutions at the state level not susceptible to the same fallibilities as politicians at the federal level?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
No, I mean their goal is to become federal politicians.
Right.
And if they can have the same power at the state level that the national politicians have, why would they want to be national
It would be
politicians?
even easier because they have a smaller, more central area to control. So why wouldn't they want that? Exactly.
Yeah, every politician seeks to use power, even if they believe it's for the better of everybody else.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
They
Exactly.
they all seek to wear the ring.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Exactly. So you had started to touch on this a little bit before, but with the freedom fiends and so forth. But what would you say was your turning point to bring you over from some of your old posts that I've seen where you wanted us to go back to the Constitution to to being an
I
anarchist.
doubt that I doubt you've ever seen that out of me.
I've seen them when you shared them. So
Okay, there was one that I had a screenshot of. I was looking for it earlier, and this was probably back around 2012.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I was rather bipolitical at the time instead of apolitical. I was
Okay.
bipolitical. I was going both ways at the time.
Okay.
No, it's leading up to the 2012 Ron Paul campaign. I regard Paul as a detour for myself. But
Okay.
anyway, I was on my road to anarchy or bust, baby, and it's I guess I kind of had a little bit of hope that this one person could do it. But here's the
Right.
thing.
Right.
And I really hate the great man worship. The great man being the notion that there's this one person that comes along once in a
He's
generation
gonna fix it. Yeah. Yep.
that has these magical powers, has this knowledge that other humans can't know, that has these capabilities of doing things that other humans are not capable of. And maybe he's human, maybe he's not. Maybe he's just a great man in a human costume.
Right. Right. Right.
And that's where the great man theory, and I refer to it as the great man fallacy, comes from, because you have mortal men built up into these super human earthly god types.
Yeah. Well, they're the prophets of that religion. They're the
Yes.
ones that come for that epoch or
Yes.
that era to fix what went wrong and to then ascend into heaven when they're done.
So I started wondering, well, maybe this could happen. But here's the thing, and I'm going to take a shot at these longtime anarcho-capitalists that they've been anarchists for a long time. They're almost the founding fathers of the modern anarcho-capitalist movement.
Right.
If Ron Paul is the solution, then the state isn't really as evil as they have made it out to be.
Right. If he can
It,
fix it,
it,
yeah.
it's not this filthy wart-covered beast. It just means that for the past 10,000 years, all of humanity has been putting the wrong people in charge and hasn't been following the plan properly.
Right, right. And if they would just stick to it, and again, that's the fallacy of every statist philosophy is you just need to follow it right, do it right, and it'll work right, and yeah,
Interpret it right.
yeah, right meaning how I personally believe it to be
Yeah,
today, not tomorrow, because I don't agree with what I think tomorrow. Only in this very moment, if everyone would just do what I want them to do, it would work perfectly. Well, that's true of anything. That's yeah.
exactly.
So yeah,
And in all honesty, no, it wouldn't. It would not work
no, it
perfectly.
would be a nightmare. Yeah, of
It
course.
would be a cluster bleep.
Exactly, exactly. So.
Because, and I'm going to go off on a little tangent here. Do you know why state socialism always winds up in um, death camps, starvation, bread lines, and all those different things, or some of those different things? Do you know why?
Well, Margaret Thatcher told me it's because they run out of other people's money.
Well, that's kind of part of it, and it that's one of those slogans that does have some truth to
Of
it.
course, of course.
But it's the cartoon version of a real answer.
Right,
It's
right.
my first real episode on my show is going to be how stuff happens. And I'm also going to throw in why. And with why, it's going to be looking at the ultimate answer, the root cause of something. Why does something work the way that it does? And if you go back through history, in 1920, I believe it was, Ludwig von Mises had released some writings talking about the economic calculation problem as it applies to socialism. And in a nutshell, what it shows is that no person or central planning committee has the knowledge possible to be able to calculate what the needs are going to be of the population and how to plan the economy accordingly to meet all those needs, wants, and desires. And his student, F.A. Hayek, had followed it up later on with the knowledge problem, or the pretense of knowledge. And what it shows is that between the two of them, you're looking at different things. So you got the central planning committee that's supposed to plan the economy, but they're supposed to be responsive to the desires of the people.
Right.
Not because they care what they think, but because they don't want to get dragged from their beds at night and hung
exactly.
upside down
and
set on fire.
Yeah, fear of the populace. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because if you have enough starvation and they can get the jump on you, you're dead. And
exactly, yeah.
Being a dictator is not really that big of a deal when you're dead. So if you have the masses in an uproar over unemployment in a particular area, that is a consideration that's going to be having an impact on the decision making of the central planning committee. They're
Right.
going to say, "Oh gosh, we have to do something about unemployment here." So they're going to be reactionary.
Right.
So when they say we have to do something about unemployment, quick, let's come up with something. Oh wait, we don't have a market-based demand, so we're just going to make some
We're
stuff
going to make
up.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the Urals, they're going to have a fish canning factory out in the middle of nowhere, and the fish is going to be brought in from 3 or 4 time zones away to be canned because they need jobs out there and they need a fish cannery.
Right. Yeah. Make work. Yeah. Busy
Yeah.
work. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a joke, and I've heard a number of people tell it. Milton Friedman, I believe, has told it. American economist goes to China, and he's going to look at a canal project. So he's out there and he's looking around and he sees all these workers using hand tools. So shovels, hose, rakes, stuff like that.
Right,
And he doesn't see any heavy machinery at all. No backhoes, no front end loaders, no bulldozers, nothing. So he goes over to the Chinese delegation and says, "Hey, why aren't you guys using modern machinery? Why are they using, hand tools,
Right.
stuff that you can get at Home Depot?"
Yep.
And the Chinese delegation, they go and they confer. They have their little huddle and they yell break. And one of them goes back and says, "Well, if we use modern machinery, then this project would be done so much quicker and all these men's jobs would go away."
Right.
And the American economist says, "Oh, it's a jobs program. Well, heck, why not take away their shovels and give them spoons?"
Yep, exactly. I love that story. I first heard it probably 10 years ago now, and it was at a time when I was, saying that I was like a neocon at this point, and I was saying, government needed to, come up with, jobs program or retraining programs because of the impact of automation on the American workforce. And I mean, just to show you how far along I was at that point. And someone shared that, and I was like, oh wow, yeah, no, I guess you're right. And then from there, I read about how automation and how innovation creates new opportunities that we can't even think about now, which create all new jobs. I mean, there are more people employed now than ever before, and it's not because of government; it's because of innovation. Our life of subsistence, however many thousands of years ago, has now been replaced with a life that is very involved and has all sorts of different things going, and that we need people to be involved in each of those different things to be able to provide them to us. And that's how innovation creates jobs, even as it makes them more efficient by requiring fewer people to do different things.
Yeah, creative destruction where
Right.
new technology destroys old technology.
Exactly.
But the thing is, the new technology opens the door. If you think about this, if you look at the history of humanity, and I don't even know how long humans have been here. I'm pretty sure it's more than just a couple thousand years.
Right.
There actually were dinosaurs, and the Earth is round. But
we're gonna do a flat Earth podcast, by the way. That's gonna happen, but not today.
Oh wow! So anyway, let's say we have a couple 100,000 years of American human history. Human history.
Right.
My God. So anyway, we have a couple 100,000 years of human history. It is really only the past 100 years or so that the technology has been strong enough to where humans don't have to worry about dying because they got bit by an insect,
Right.
at least not on a regular basis.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And there's some places in Africa that they don't have DDT and in modern medicine that they
Right.
have to
Right.
worry about this. But here in the developed world, here in most of Earth, you don't have to worry about dying because you got bit by an insect. You're not going to die because your leg was broken. As a
Right.
matter of
Right.
fact, you'll be running around again in 8 weeks,
Right.
like nothing had happened.
Yep. Yep.
You don't have to worry about being picked up by a flying animal and taken off and eaten for dinner. You can,
Thankfully.
if you can't see, you can put on glasses.
Yeah.
You can talk to people 1,000 miles away.
Like we're doing right now. Exactly.
Exactly,
Yeah. Yep.
in real time. So as far as the advancements that have come along, it's really only the last 100 years that you can say that humanity has been wealthy. Because
Yep.
even in 500 years ago, if a king had a room full of pots of gold, what was he going to spend it on?
Yep. Yep. He's going to spend it on food or someone to protect his pots of gold, pretty much.
Yeah, he didn't have air conditioning.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, whenever I see those things where people are like those quizzes and people will say, "Oh, if you could go back in time to any time, what time would it be?" And I'm like, I don't want to go back to the '80s. Like, I don't really want to go back at all.
50 years from now.
Yeah,
That's why I want
like
to go
I
to.
want to go to a time forward where they can cure MS. That would be nice because I have MS. But it's not so far forward that I'm completely foreign there and have no idea what's going on. But yeah, I've never been nostalgic about that, and I certainly don't think that government has any legitimate role in protecting us from the future. Space Force.
Well, that is actually the backbone of conservatism. People have this notion that conservatism is about small, limited government. It's not. It never has been.
No.
This has never been the case. Going back to Hobbes and Edmund Burke, it's about creating a giant Leviathan state. The difference between conservatism and what's known as liberalism today is you got the mommy that's supposed to nurture, and then the
Right.
conservatives are the daddy that's supposed to. Yeah,
discipline you. Yeah,
he comes home drunk with his wife beater. He pulls his belt off in one swoop without even latching it on the loops, and he starts whooping your butt for disobedience. You ever notice that most conservatives have a disobedience fetish that makes German shepherds look like feral cats?
Which is crazy because all of their, yes, to answer your question, and again, I was a conservatarian, liberty-leaning conservative, whatever you want to call it, and I kind of transitioned, towards being a minarchist. But all of literally the Tea Party that came after, initially in response to the TARP bailouts from Bush, and then went into overdrive when Obama got elected, and the Democrats kept power in Congress. The entire concept of the Tea Party is this rebellion against taxation and rebellion against government, and the Second Amendment, and from these cold dead hands and all of that stuff. So it's all built around rebellion, but they don't take that logical conclusion about rebellion against whom exactly, because then they'll turn around and say, well, if David Hogg or Nancy Pelosi come to take my guns, they're going to have to take them from my cold dead hands. And it's like, that's not who's coming. The police are coming, and the ones who support the police bumper sticker you have on your car, that's who will come because it's their job. Nancy Pelosi is going to stay at home, I've yet to have someone, other than just cognitive dissonance, explain why I, at one point, was so into this, rebellion against the state, but then would immediately turn around and say, well, if you want to come here, go through the legal process. And if you get pulled over, just put your hands on the steering wheel and you won't have any trouble. And if you don't, then you deserve whatever happens to you.
Not our heroes. When Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats put on their body armor and go to kick in your door, our police are going to arrest them and do their jobs.
Exactly. Our army is going to stop them because that's
not our.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Exactly. ARE. Our heroes. It is a very, and I think it was Hayek who wrote the Why I'm Not a Conservative or Why I'm No Longer a Conservative, and he talked about pretty much what you're saying. Conservatism traditionally was not about limiting government. It was about stopping progress of any kind, including societal progress.
It is to preserve the status quo.
Yeah.
I believe it was William F. Buckley. His quote was, "If we could, we would look in the face of history and shout, 'Stop!
Yeah,
You will go no further.'"
Standing athwart history, yelling stop. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and the defense that they have for keeping things the way that they have always been is, well, is tried and true. Well, you don't know that it's tried and true. Mostly it's a fear of change.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, they don't give an opportunity to find out if the new proposed idea is any better. But even more, and this is why I refer to them as progressive authoritarians, is they wish to use the force of the state to stop things. And now when I say progressive, I don't mean actual progress like material progress, technological progress. I mean control freaks. They want to progress
the state.
They want to progress to their idealistic utopian version of statism.
Yeah. Well, progressive in medical terms. So like MS is a progressive disease, and I think that's fitting to call it that, because it progresses along until things get worse, and that's I've always liked that. I like that when progressives use the term progressive, because I'm like, oh, progressive, you mean like cancer, like a disease that kills you slowly, and so that's. But I don't understand that disconnect, and I'm sure there are people much smarter than me that have done the due diligence on the disconnect between worshiping rebellion. And liberals do this too. I mean, the left does this too. They have these, they celebrate Che Guevara and all these revolutionary figures who immediately turned around and became dictators. But then at the same time, they the same way that governments want immigrants to wait in line, the left wants patients to wait in line, and wants all of us to wait in line for everything.
Yeah, well, when the right wingers say we're not opposed to immigration, we're opposed to illegal immigration. They're just a mirror of the lefties that say we're not opposed to gun ownership, we're just opposed to illegal gun ownership.
Yep, exactly.
And but the thing is, the conservatives are also opposed to illegal gun ownership because they want people to follow the law. They just want the laws to look a little bit different. So what it really comes down to, and going back to your comment earlier about people are saying, well, what's going to happen with the Supreme Court? Well, here's what's going to happen. People are not going to be waiting for a decision or opinion to show what the law really means. They're going to be hoping to get somebody that will confirm their belief system.
Yep.
So when people say that they want a conservative interpretation of the Constitution, or on the opposite, they say they want a liberal interpretation, that's the whole thing. It's an interpretation.
Yep.
It's a battle to see if the creeps and the moo-moos are going to agree with you on this.
Yeah, and you could literally take the Constitution out of it and just have them decide how it should go, and it would be the same thing. It would be just people deciding which way this particular thing should go. The rule of law is sort of
it's a mythological creature. The rule of law is the straw man for the rule of men and women.
Yeah, the rule of whoever is in front of you saying the thing.
Mostly unremarkable men and women.
Right, people that couldn't make it in a real job. By
the way, do you find it at all interesting that the Tea Party is named after a group that got angry at the government and then destroyed private property of corporations?
The original Antifa.
Yeah, they were an offshoot of Colonial Lives Matter.
So that's a funny thing. Yeah,
because a black man did get killed by law enforcement, and there was a lot of raising up about it. Well, there were 5 people that got killed by cops, and there's a lot of outrage over it, and that eventually led to the looting and pillaging and destruction of private corporate property.
I never made that connection because Crispus Attucks, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he died in the Boston when was it? He was killed in Boston, right? During the protest.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was the shot heard around the world, or if that was the incident where John Adams had defended the British soldiers.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, I don't recall now, but that's yeah, I never made that connection. But yeah, it's you get mad at something government did, and then you destroy private property as a result of it, like when Antifa
Yes.
punches Nazi trash cans and
Or in Ferguson, there was complaining about the people looting the stores and the like the
yeah,
Verizon store and all this sort of stuff. And they're right to complain about that. But if you're from a political party that gets its name from the same type of activity, then you're a hypocrite.
exactly, yeah.
Every time this happens, and I see this, I'm like, you're burning the wrong buildings.
Yep, yep, exactly, exactly. So, and we've touched on this, I think, a little bit, but I just wanted you to speak on, if you will, about. I find it funny now that I'm not in the partisan back and forth. It's very easy for me to just sit back and laugh at the basically every 4 or 8 years the switching sides between the left and the right, quote unquote, the different stripes of authoritarians. When Obama came into office, all of a sudden everyone was all of the ones that were over here saying, you need to respect our government, and went over to here and said, we need to rebel, and cold dead hands and all of that stuff. And then the people that were on the left, were now saying, oh, we have to respect this government and the office of the president under Obama. And then they, both sides immediately switched places once it was now Trump, even though largely I'd say at least 98% they're doing the same thing anyway. There's some window dressing changes they make, but for the most part, they're still running up debt that they presume for us to be forced to pay for. They're still, murdering people in countries all over the world. They're still murdering people here. They're still, removing people from the country because they didn't, pay their duties or, fill out the right document. They're still kidnapping people for, selling substances or whatever else. So, talk to me about the hypocrisy and the hilarity of that.
It's like in the book 1984 when the banner dropped, they paused for a moment and then shouted, "We've always been at war with East Asia." It is there have to be men and women wearing lab coats, holding clipboards, writing stuff down as they watch this. The cognitive dissonance and the just insanity that goes along with it,
Right.
the tribal mentality of our party, right or wrong. Well,
Right.
if you say stuff like that, then you probably don't realize that there's a difference between right and wrong.
Yep. Yep.
And these people do not hate tyranny. They do not hate big government. They do not hate small government. They hate each other. That's it.
Yep. Yep.
These are the people that will destroy their own liberty to take the liberty of another.
Right.
And they are so consumed with hatred that they will self-destruct. I mean, these are the suicide bombers of ideology.
Yeah. Yeah. Except they're using government as a proxy for their hatred,
Yes.
rather than
Yes.
doing it themselves.
Government is their bomb vest, and they're pounding the living daylights out of the trigger button
Right. 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 Well, that's
every time they vote.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when you vote and you put your ballot in the box, you should just shout, "Fire in the hole!"
Yeah, I saw you had said that. I usually just draw on it with crayons, but they don't accept it anymore. But
I don't even show up.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of people. So the people that are protesting these, extrajudicial killings, police killings of a lot of times of black people, and their response will be, they'll see an example of a white person not being killed by the police, and they'll get upset about that, and they'll say, well, why didn't they get killed too, basically. And I get what their point is that, their theory or what they're trying to say is that, if it had been a black person, that they would have possibly been treated worse or been more likely to have been treated worse or whatever. But the fact that they went to the other place of saying, well, they're not saying don't harm me. They're saying, well, harm that guy too, the same way you would harm me.
Right.
And it, like you said, it's a hatred thing. It's not about freedom. It's not about fairness or I guess it's a form of equity, but it's an equity of I want that person to be hurt. I'm not necessarily sure what happens
to me. It's an equity of misery.
Yeah, equity of misery, exactly.
Yes, it's Schadenfreude.
Yes,
I'm plain and simple. That is taking joy in other people's suffering.
Right.
It's the people that say, and the tariffs argument is a prime example. Rather than saying there should be no tariffs, they say that there should be tariffs for everybody. Everybody should have to suffer equally.
Right.
And the idea that nobody suffers is just absolutely not a possibility. Bastiat wrote about this in The Law, I believe it was, where he says there are three ways to order society: the few plunder the many plunder the few, or nobody plunders everybody.
Right.
And you'll get arguments for the first two, but when you start talking about nobody plundering anybody, that's when you've crossed that Overton window. That's when you've gone outside of the allowable, respectable opinion, and you're a bleeping lunatic.
That's
for
crazy.
it.
That could never happen. And when I say, well, why could that never happen? And they'll say, well, that side will never let that happen. Okay, well, then why do you want to be in forced association with that side then? Because at least in that other scenario, that side would have to actually on their own fight you to control you. The situation you're advocating for, and not you, the hypothetical person.
I understand the linguistics of this.
Yeah, the system they're advocating for, those people that they don't trust that are trying to control them are able to do it using, just by, writing on a sheet of paper and putting it in a box. And I've never gotten that disconnect. But like you said, it's an Overton window thing. It's about perception of what's sane.
Well, it's also, and I'm going to go back to the tariff issue. It's also the tribalism of, well, my guy said this.
Right.
It's the great man worship. So for the Republicans or the conservatives, Trump is their current great man.
Right.
And when he starts talking about tariffs, a few will deviate and they will be snapped at by the other slaves on the plantation.
Yep.
Before the overseer even gets to them, the other slaves on the plantation will snap at them. So you best act right, otherwise Matt's going to get us.
Right, exactly. Like they're gonna hurt us if you don't shut up. Yeah.
He's going to hurt us all if you don't shut up.
Right.
And what you're looking at is they will come up with all these justifications. So they will use the argument with the tariffs that we are losing money from it. No, you're not losing money from it because you're not selling anything over there. Okay. Going back to the basics of trade, America does not trade with China or any other country.
No.
Buyers and sellers trade with each other.
Yep.
So it's kind of like the old peanut butter cup commercials where you got your chocolate and my peanut butter. You got your peanut butter and my chocolate.
Right.
You got your nationalism and my economics. Get it the hell out of there.
Yep, exactly.
It doesn't belong there. Go.
Yep.
Gone.
Yeah. America's not trading with China. I'm buying something from Walmart, who bought something from a supplier who is using, using a distributor that's distributing from a manufacturer in China. There's a bunch of voluntary interactions that have happened that government is only making worse. They're not helping in any way.
Nobody says that people in Illinois trade with people in Wisconsin.
Right.
They just refer to that as commerce.
Well, and I've said that to someone that lives around here in the same county as me, and I said, okay, you're talking about America first. Why not Horry County first? Like, why are we allowing those idiots in Marion County or those jerks in North Carolina across that border? Why are we allowing them to take all of our jobs? And obviously, they fall back into nationalism about these are our people and stuff. And it's like, okay, these are your people. Is Nancy Pelosi your people? Are the Black Lives Matters protesters, are those your people that you want to use force to protect? Do you want to pay taxes on products to make sure that a Black Lives Matter protester keeps their job? Like, talk to me about our people when you are constantly talking about how you hate our people. If that's what they are. So it's cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. So and also I live on a state border. I mean, I'm like about 10 to 15 minutes since I moved. Right. But anyway, the different laws and taxes and all this other stuff, and particularly when you're doing anything business related as a business, and I'm not just talking about engaging in commerce, but as a business person, when you're dealing with crossing state lines and all this other stuff, it's like, Jesus Christ, it's a river, not a demilitarized zone. Why all this craziness that goes along with it?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and because with a lot of states, the state line is a river.
Yeah.
The Mississippi River is a dividing line between a lot of different states.
Yeah.
That's a big giant line too.
Yeah.
You could probably fit a couple states in the Mississippi River. But anyway, so you're like, why does this have to be so complicated? Why do we have to deal with all this nonsense here and there? But anyway, so with the tariff things, what happens is they're making in the quest to protect the domestic producers. Oh, and by the way, they're not really protecting domestic producers. They're just sticking it to the politically unconnected foreign producers. But what they do is, because they are unable to make the domestic producers more competitive, they artificially make the foreign competitors less competitive.
Right, exactly.
So nothing has been made cheaper for the consumer. No special capabilities have been granted to the domestic producers. It's just the foreign producers have been made artificially less competitive. So it's kind of like in Harrison Bergeron, where the strong had to carry extra weights around with them, and the smarter had to have the radio boxes on their head to keep them from having coherent thoughts,
Right.
so that the smarter and stronger would be as weak and dumb as the lower end of the spectrum.
Right. And in doing so, they're actually harming jobs. So the example I give
Yes.
is if an American produced widget costs, let's say, $25, and you can get a foreign produced widget for $10. So it's a big price difference. And so the government steps in and says, okay, we're putting a $15 or $16 tariff on any widgets that are brought in from foreign countries. So now the American produced widget is still $25, but the foreign widget is $26. That's not helping American widget producers. That's just making their widget's still the same price. They're just making the foreign ones more expensive. And in doing so, here's what also happens. If I have a gadget producing company and I make gadgets and I have to have widgets to make my gadgets, I now have one of two choices. Either now the price of my gadgets just went up, relative to the price of gadgets from people that make their gadgets outside of the U.S., or I move my base of production to a country where I can still get widgets for $10 to make my gadgets. And so we're even seeing that. We're seeing Harley Davidson is talking about moving, and other companies that because of these American and steel tariffs are moving, or at least not increasing their base of production in the U.S. in direct response to these steel and aluminum tariffs, which is weird because I was specifically told that this was going to help American jobs, and yet that's not happening.
I have a friend that is a chemical engineer. He owns a chemical company, and he has had to jump through so many hoops and change things around. And he's not Dow Chemical. He's a small family-owned company, and for him, this is really rough on him.
Yeah.
And he's had to make great changes to keep from skyrocketing his prices. But here's the big thing that people don't understand. And let's say that the foreign priced one actually goes up to $30 instead of $25, or instead of $26.
Right.
The domestic producer no longer has an incentive to be competitive and can take his up to $29.
Yep.
Which is usually what happens.
Yeah.
So what has really happened is that through this economic affirmative action program, the strong have been made weak, and the weak have remained weak.
And get weaker.
Yes. And then of course the chumps for Trump, the Trumpster fire dipsticks will go through all sorts of mental gymnastics to justify this, and they'll say, well, he's a businessman. He's using this as a way to get them to drop their tariffs. This is just a bargaining chip. And it's really amazing how much the pawns love being in a game of 3D chess.
Oh, of course. Well, yeah, it's 3D chess that never actually ends. It just keeps, progressing.
Yeah. And you know what happens to pawns, right? They get sacrificed.
Of course. And the thing is, if your goal, if we all agree that tariffs are bad, then why not just get rid of them? Why would I say to you, if you and I it would be like you and me negotiating, and I say, okay, look, I'm going to stop punching myself in the face, but only if you stop punching yourself in the face, Lou. And you go, no, I'm not going to stop punching myself in the face until you do. And I go, well, screw that. I'm going to keep punching myself in the face. I'm not a loser. And I'm winning this negotiation. It's the same thing. If we agree, then tariffs primarily hurt the consumer and hurt us more so than they hurt anyone else, then what would be the point of negotiating with the other side to change theirs? Let them figure it out. Why wouldn't, if we agree that, trade is good with it.
Because MAGA.
Well, of course, yeah, because he's a businessman. And I like to say, well, okay, well, George Soros is a businessman and he's actually worth more than Trump. So I guess we should listen to him. So
here's where the ultimate root of that comes from. These people, if you listen to them and you just give them the rope to hang themselves, they will out themselves as the socialists that they are.
Of course.
Because what they're going to say, their goal is, okay, we trade one of ours and we get one of theirs. They trade one of theirs, and we get one of ours.
Right.
Well, that's a zero-sum game.
Exactly.
If you look at exchange, if you look at exchange between two people, let's say, let's go to Liberty Fest where I was selling dinners. I was selling a porchetta dinner for $15, mm-hmm. and that came with a vegetable and then a salad bar. So obviously, I wanted the $15 more than I wanted the food. And the people that purchased the dinner from me, wanted the food more than they wanted the $15. So it's a mutually beneficial transaction. Both sides feel that they're better off or at least at the time of the sale. Somebody might decide that, oh my gosh, I'm Jewish or Muslim, I can't eat pork anymore. Right after they get done eating, or right before they eat. I would recommend that the conversion happen after you eat my food, but but anyway, people determine that it's to their benefit to engage in this transaction. They don't need a middleman to tell them no, they can't.
Right.
And if you look at it, and particularly out of the socialist ideology, the Marxist, the person, even though both sides feel that they're better off, the person that received the money, not the person that received the actual goods, but the person that received the Federal Reserve notes, is always considered to be the one that won out on the transaction. Is the seller has screwed the buyer.
Right.
And these right-wing socialists, they buy into that nonsense because they worry about the profits going everywhere else because they have their nationalism and their economics.
Yep.
They're thinking with their flags and not their brains.
Yep.
And they don't understand that, okay, it's a two-way transaction. Yeah, the money went there, but the goods came here. And I remember I was standing in line in a Walmart, and there was this little skinny guy, skinny like a crackhead skinny, but he wasn't a crackhead because, well, he wasn't all gimped out like a crackhead. But he's in Walmart, and he's got his arms. He's got these bags in his arms. And he's a little skinny guy. The stuff in his bags darn near pulled him over from one side to the other. And he almost fell over because of all the stuff he had in his hands. Mm-hmm. And it's like, Walmart got all my money, But I never heard a cashier saying, man, all these people coming in here taking all of our crap.
Yeah, taking our pots and pans. Yeah, exactly.
They got all of our stuff. They got all of our vegetables. They got all of our pots and pans. They got all of our tents and camping gear. And all we have are these worthless green paper rectangles.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the fallacy of the trade imbalance. Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody ever says that. They always view the seller as the one that won in the competition. But it's not a competition because you don't have a winner and a loser in a transaction. You have both sides are winners.
I got all of the stuff that I wanted. With the only times that I have,
and I only had to go to one place.
Yeah, the only times that I've spent money that I can think of offhand that I've spent money and not gotten essentially what I wanted is from government. If I'm paying taxes or a fee or a license or any of those things, even if I complained about it, like for example, if I'm complaining that I'm having to pay a mortgage or an HOA fee, I'm still getting something in exchange for it. I may not like that I'm having to do it on a regular basis. I may become resentful of it, but the reality is if I didn't have that mortgage, I wouldn't own the home that I'm in. I wouldn't have that home to live in. I'd be paying rent to someone, which I could also be bitter about. But like you said, it's still a voluntary transaction where someone is paying someone something for something that they got in exchange. So go ahead.
Or you might be living in a makeshift shelter because nobody's building buildings because they can't make money off of it.
Well, exactly. Yeah. If there was no scheme in which you could exchange, the fruits of your labor for for housing, no one would build housing, and that's which I mean I will have an entire episode where we get into libertarian socialism and the whole rent is theft thing.
Oh,
Because
you mean banana
banana
octopusism?
octopusism, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Where I want us to be free. You can't let people be in your home and expect them to pay you. That's sort of like being free, I guess. But yeah, I'm gonna do a whole show about that. But yeah,
I
so
might
I
not
mean,
listen, but anyway. So, yeah, and it's just it's the busybodyism of conservatism, which is a mirror image of the busybodyism of liberalism,
yep,
and they can't leave other people alone.
yep,
In the case of the tariffs, they are worried that the wrong person is making the profit,
right,
just as the socialists are. The
yep,
socialists want worker-owned co-ops, while the or the left-wing socialists, the right-wing socialists want American-owned corporations.
yep. And it's ultimately
You
the
know,
same thing. You've got two sides
and
that are both saying, you've got the left saying, "Don't harm me, harm them," and then the right is saying, "No, don't harm me, harm them." And then in a inspiring show of bipartisanship, government decides to harm everyone.
yeah, do what you want to the women and children, but leave me
Leave me
alone.
alone. Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. You got the evil party and the stupid party. Sometimes they get together and do something both evil and stupid. And that's
Yeah,
called bipartisanship.
exactly. So
So, yeah. But going back to the Supreme Court, what am I going to do when they offer their opinion? Ignore it. I don't care. Do you know why the Soviet Union lasted as long as it did?
no.
The only reason that the Soviet Union lasted as long as it did was because of black and gray markets. The reason that the Soviet Union existed as long as it did was because there were people smart enough to realize that state socialism is not a viable way of doing things,
Mm,
and it will lead to death and starvation. Because people were incentivized with survival, and
survival instinct.
also,
Yeah.
yeah, they wanted to survive, but they also wanted to be comfortable, because that
Right.
is one of the human things. And yeah, the Puritans, which the modern conservatives and early liberals are descended from, the Puritans think that you're supposed to suffer nobly. Well, these people were not going to suffer nobly. They wanted to enjoy the material gains and benefits that early socialism or the early Soviet Union promised everybody. It's really
Right.
amazing. The socialists promised the bountiful cornucopia, the great feast for everybody. And then when they realized that that couldn't happen, that's when the tune changed and they quit talking about it, and
It
they
became about
adapted.
struggling. Yeah, the
Yeah.
workers struggle. Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
they adapted to the nobility of doing with less and
Yep.
the nobility of suffering.
Yep. Well, and you see it
So
with the left now. What's the joke? Gay space luxury communism or whatever, where they're like, they say, oh, communism. If we had communism, the level of luxury that we'd have, you can't even imagine. It's like this is what the Leninists said. This is what this is
yeah,
this is the exact same thing that the Marxists were saying as they were overthrowing the Russian crown, and shortly after Stalin got in or maybe just before, it became, well, no, we need less, and that's all bourgeoisie capitalist stuff. This whole wanting to have better things. Um, and that's the same thing that
yeah.
happens here.
Yeah, socialism always boasts about the equal wealth and the great amount of wealth, and it always results in the equal shortages. Well, equal for some,
Right.
because the party folks are, as far as the animals on the farm go, they're more equal than the proletariat.
Of course, of course. Well, a mass grave is equal. They're all dead, right? So
Yeah,
that's
yeah, it's really interesting. I saw a meme not too long ago, and there was a Twitter response to it, and I think it said that like the top four richest people control $426 billion worth of wealth or something like that, and that's the reason why everybody else is poor.
right.
And somebody came along and says, well, if you divided that up amongst the poorest 4 billion people on the planet, they'd each have $126.
Right. That's not
And
that's not going to change
yeah,
it. And they wouldn't
and,
have Amazon or Facebook or
yeah,
Microsoft or any. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
yeah. People aren't poor because other people are rich.
No. No.
And that is something that both the left and right need to get past. And this goes back to the whole terrorist thing. But anyway, going back to the Soviet Union, the government even into the 80s, or in the 80s, had to publicly acknowledge that at least 20% of their economy was verifiably in the black and gray market.
Right, right, right.
And had it not been for the black and gray markets, the Soviet Union would have, I don't think they admitted this, but the Soviet Union would have collapsed
Even
probably pretty
sooner.
early on, because you would have had mass starvation. You would have had just people freaking out and rebelling, and the Bolsheviks would have had done to them what they did to the previous regime.
Right, right. Well, and to the Ukrainians, I mean, that was what happened to
Yeah.
the Holodomor, or however you pronounce that, where the farmers were rebelling and saying,
Holodomor, I think it
Yeah,
was. Yeah.
Holodomor, however you say that, which made the Holocaust look like a joke.
Oh yeah.
And that's certainly not saying anything about. I mean, the Holocaust was obviously devastating, but the number of people killed in the Ukraine dwarfs that, and was over a shorter period of time as well.
There
And it was entirely, rebelling farmers that were starved to death.
there was a story, and I'm going to get it. I'm going to get the wording a little bit wrong, but I'm going to get the gist of it.
Right.
When discussing, and this was like at the height of the starvation, I think it was, because in what happened was Ukraine was the European breadbasket.
Right.
That's where the grain production was. That was the food production capital of the Soviet Union.
Yep. Yep.
So there's absolutely no reason that there should be starvation there. So
Exactly.
what had happened was the food that was being produced was being confiscated by the Soviets.
Right. Right.
So Stalin had ordered all the food to be taken out of there, and people were forced into starvation. So whatever they couldn't steal from the state farms and everything else was getting grabbed up and taken away.
Right.
These people did not have enough to subsist. Their choices were to be good people or cannibals.
Yep. Yep.
And yes, the cannibalism ran rampant. I remember hearing about a letter where somebody says, that there's good people and there's cannibals.
Yep. Yep.
I regret to tell you that I'm no longer a good person.
Right.
Could you imagine being in a situation where your very survival depended upon eating your family members?
No. No.
For those of you out there listening, I want you to take more than just a cursory second to think about that. Look at your family members and think, how would you feel knowing that the only way that you're going to survive is to eat them or
Yep.
your neighbors?
Yep.
And just imagine the mental anguish and strain that's put upon you watching your friends, neighbors, and family members dying of starvation right in front of you. This is more than just watching Merlin Olsen on one of the Feed the Children commercials.
Right.
We're talking, hardcore right in your face, and your choices are you can die or you can do the unthinkable.
Yep. Yep. Or if you're being selfless and care more about your family, they have to eat you to survive. Like, I mean, someone's eating someone to survive, and it's entirely because of an oppressive monopoly that is forcing you to not be able to engage in voluntary transactions.
Yeah. So what wind up happening is, because the system was not designed to provide this bountiful feast that was promised, and then they changed the promise to, well, we're gonna starve nobly. People didn't want to starve.
Right.
So what they started doing was they started going outside of the system, and it was called creeping capitalism.
Yep.
And just like the American conservatives with their war on drugs, they ignored the fact that eating and certain luxury items are a market demand.
Right.
And so they imposed imposed the death penalty for these economic crimes of private ownership of property,
Yep.
buying and selling without the government being involved. And we're not just talking, we're talking about a little bit more than just having a permit, but essentially that's what it comes down to.
It's the same argument. It's the same logical
Yeah.
argument that you need government permission to, to want to have to want to fulfill your needs. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the hospitals, there was often no medication. And by no medication, I'm including aspirin, but I'm also talking about the prescription drugs. In the Soviet Union, you would not be able to get your medication for your MS. You
Right.
would,
No,
at least not through the system. So you would have to go to the black market. And the doctors and the nurses and the pharmacists would tell you, you have to go to the black market. Here's a guy that might be able to help you.
Right. Taking it even further, if there weren't places that still had at least some capitalism, drugs for MS wouldn't even exist in the first place. I mean,
Right.
the profit motive, the reason that there even is the drug that I take for MS is because it costs, they're charging the insurance companies 18 grand a pop to each month to give it to me. And if it weren't for that profit motive, they wouldn't have spent the billions of dollars and gone through all of the years of case studies and double blind and triple blind trials and everything else.
Have you listened to my interview with Mary Ruwart? It's episode 1 of the Lou Sanders Show.
I have not. I got your second one. I did not get your first one.
She talks about, because she worked for Upjohn for 19 years as a research scientist, and she talks about what regulations have done. She has a book out called Death by Regulation, and it talks about why the price of medications is so god-awfully high and inflated. Yeah. So without those interventions there, mostly protectionist on behalf of the established pharmaceutical companies, the price of medications would be a heck of a lot lower, and they get to market a lot quicker.
Right.
But the thing is, with these restrictions that they had in the Soviet Union, you just couldn't get the stuff. It didn't exist.
Yeah, exactly.
So the black and gray markets were basic staple items like food, medication, all these different things. Basic survival stuff. Then also you had West German appliances, televisions, radio, stuff like that, clothing. Levi Strauss did 100 million times more to bring down the Berlin Wall and the Cold War than Ronald Reagan and every other politician or soldier ever dreamt of.
Right. Because they wanted those things. Yeah.
Yes. The demand for what they perceived to be freedom became greater than the demand to be tyrannized.
Right. Now, so to kind of close out, and I agree with all of that, to kind of close out our interview, especially since it's the 4th of July, I get asked this a lot when I get someone into a logical and rhetorical corner where they can't find a way to justify the state anymore. And so their response usually, if they aren't at that point just calling me a libtard or a America hater or
you hate America,
you hate America, and well then you must have, or saying well then you must want since you don't want there to be a government.
You mean the false dichotomy?
Yeah, you must want babies to be raped or something like whatever thing they think I must want. Apparently, if they don't do that, and if they're just I guess maybe in the next step of it, they'll say, well, how are you going to get your precious ANCAP society that you want? And honestly, my response is usually that it's going to take people understanding that they don't need this government. But I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that. What do you see as, and not necessarily brass tack steps of what would need to happen, but what do you think are the things that would need to actually happen in order for us to truly not just have a smaller government, but as a society to transition away from having government?
I was hoping you would ask that question, and I'm going to throw something out here, and it's really going to mess up a lot of people. We are never going to be free.
Okay.
We are never going to have liberty. You are going to be free and have liberty. I am going to be free and have liberty, but we are never going to be free and have liberty. And what that means is people have this idea that liberty is a collective thing. Freedom is collective. No. Granted, in many cases, and particularly politically, our liberty and freedom are intertwined with one another. As Frederick Douglass, as Frederick Douglass had said, you cannot put a leash around your neighbor's ankle without finding the other end attached to your neck.
Right,
That's for Campaign for a Longer Leash. So it's a play on Frederick Douglass. With the political thing, people have this idea, and this is something that I really hate about the true believers of the Libertarian Party, and I include the anarchists that are involved in the Libertarian Party that think that the LP and getting the right people in charge and centrally planning the deconstruction of the state is going to bring freedom to one another. It's not going to happen, because plain and simple, these same people that you and I have been making jokes about for most of the show,
right,
There's a lot more of them out there than us.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
so if you wait upon everybody else accepting freedom and liberty as their way of life
Right.
before you can have yours, it's like I'll stop punching myself in the face if you stop punching yourself in the face. That
Exactly.
is a perfect analogy for it. It's not going to happen.
Right.
So I go back. So I go back to your question. Well, what about the Supreme Court? Well, the only way, and this is a quote from Albert Camus or Albert Camus. I think he's French. Uh, the only way to live or in an unfree world, you must live so freely that your very existence is an act
Act
of
of rebellion.
rebellion.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I know I butchered that, but you get the idea of it.
Right, right, right. So it's really, and this is interesting because if you ever read or listen to anything about toxic relationships, it's pretty much everything you just said. That toxic relationships are codependent. I can't do something unless you do it too. You have to do this because I'm doing it, and that in order to get people out of toxic relationships, a lot of times you have to actually work with them on their cognitive behaviors. The fact that they tie themselves so much to this other person or these other people that they aren't even the idea of them thinking for themselves is completely foreign. And so you have to really get down to the brass tacks of, like, for example, saying I'm responsible for my actions, I'm not responsible for other people's actions, and I'm not responsible for their reaction to my actions. And so it sounds like it's very similar to what you're saying, in the same way that the only way that I can't control if my neighbor has a bad marriage. I can tell them, hey, look, I don't think this is working out for you guys, and maybe you want to consider, taking a break or something. But if they don't do it, that doesn't mean, and I love my marriage, but if I were also in a bad marriage, I can't say, well, wait a second, I can't get out of my marriage. Those folks over there are staying in their marriage, and we all have to stay in our bad marriages. I have to make choices for myself, regardless of what they're doing. And so that's sort of what you're saying, that even though not having the fact that we don't live in a libertarian free society means that those people can harm us, there's not a lot that you and I as individuals can do about that other than to live as free as we possibly can.
Yes. As an example, when somebody says that's illegal, I'm like, so.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you look at the history of what has been legal and what has been illegal, that's certainly not a very
At all. A
strong
good argument.
it's not a strong argument for the good and bad of legality.
Right. And I love, because I'll say, well, name every major atrocity. It was legal, and resisting it was illegal. And they'll go, are you trying to compare what I'm talking about to the Holocaust? And I'll say, not.
Yes.
Well, see, I'm nicer than you, because I'll say, no, I'm comparing the same. I'm comparing
no
the appeal to legality, but it logically, no, it is this. Any appeal to it's written on a sheet of paper, so you have to do it, is the same as any other appeal.
Yeah. Well, the comparison between the massacre of the Indians here in America and the massacre of the Jews, the Gypsies, the homosexuals, and Jehovah's Witnesses in Nazi Germany.
Right.
It's not a difference.
Yeah.
It's not a difference in kind. It's a difference in degree.
Yep.
It's the same act. The only thing in debate is the numbers.
Right. Exactly.
So the belief that Hitler was worse, and you know what, Stalin and Mao killed an awful lot more people than Hitler ever dreamed of.
More people than Hitler. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Hitler was like malaria, where those guys were like, super cancer.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah.
So the thing is, we live in an unfree world. Plain and simple. Granted, you can wave your flag and follow all the rules and get all your licenses and permits and believe that you're free. You're not.
Right.
It's an unfree world. And because it's an unfree world, you can never be totally free. What you can do is you can grab a little freedom where you can. Get what you can when you can.
Yep.
Sometimes you have to steal that freedom from your oppressor.
And
steal it.
And just to clarify, because I know I'm going to have people that aren't getting what you're saying. You're not saying to steal from people. You're saying to steal your freedom back from people that are assuming authority over.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know you know that, but I can already hear. But he said to steal. That's not what you said. Yeah.
You're taking back what is rightfully yours.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you could call. I guess stealing is a bit of semantics.
No, and it is. I mean, you're taking. They've taken it from you, and so you're taking it back from them.
Every time that you get an opportunity to live freely and to do something outside of that system,
do it.
Take it.
Yep.
just like the Soviets with, if they wanted to eat, oftentimes they had to go through black markets. Okay, we're fortunate here. We don't have to go to that extreme.
Yep.
But think about this. When you buy food from your neighbor, look, I live in a rural area. So I only buy eggs at the store when I need to. Like, when I need to get a bunch of them. Like I bought some before Liberty Fest
Right.
because I serve breakfast down there.
Yeah.
I had almost enough from the guy that I work with that raises chickens and produces eggs to where I didn't have to go to the store to buy too many of them. I bought extras just in case.
Oh, wow.
So the thing is, he's not licensed. None of that money goes into taxes. I pay less for a superior product than I would pay at the store for an inferior product.
Yep. Yep.
Nobody gets harmed. And there's a million and one ways that you can live outside the system. Now, I'm not saying that people should take the vow of poverty and not go to stores or anything like that.
No.
And that's kind of crazy. But every opportunity that you have to step outside of the matrix and be free, take it.
Yeah.
And that's going to lead me into Liberty Fest, because that is a little slice of freedom. The Midwest Peace and Liberty Fest, we just had it not too long ago.
Mm-hmm.
It was in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And it's really an amazing time. So what you see on the schedule is we had speakers like Scott Horton from antiwar.com that came out there. And I don't know how much you know about him or your listeners, but this guy is a supercomputer of knowledge on militarism, intervention, terrorism, and just all the stuff that has to do with the American empire for the last century or so. He has a book out called Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. And I can't wait to dig into it, because it covers a lot of the intervention in the Middle East and what led up to the 9/11 attacks and what has happened since then.
Yep.
And this guy is a wealth of knowledge. Now, for the conservative, neoconservative, they hate us for our freedoms type.
For our freedom.
They're going to hate this book because it's going to contradict every false belief that they have.
The 2002 me is going to hate this book.
Yes, but 2018 you is going to learn something.
Exactly. So,
and I'm a veteran. I did 9 years in the Army. I did part of it was active duty, and then part of it was reserves. And I am a recovering neocon. And my conversion from being a warmonger, it's crazy being a neocon and having been in the military, because usually those two don't go hand in hand together.
You don't see a lot of neocons from the Army, no. They usually come out fairly libertarian leaning a lot of the time.
Yeah, but it's very easy to tell on the Facebook keyboard warriors who's done actual military time and who's just veterans of the meme more.
Yeah.
The language that they use, because they're more status about the military than actual military people are.
Exactly.
But anyway, so you got Scott Horton there, and then also you got Dana Martin, who was there to talk about unschooling, peaceful parenting, things like that. Mm-hmm. And incidentally, on the Midwest Peace and Liberty Fest YouTube page, I'll shoot you a link to that we're putting up videos of the presentations from there. But anyway, so you got Dana Martin there. Now, if you're concerned with your children learning and getting a better education than they can get in the government indoctrination gulags, and you're concerned, you're curious about how to do this, I have friends that are single parents that work professional career type positions, and they unschool their children, and their children are well balanced. They have social skills. They have all these things going for them, and they don't have any of the, I don't want to say behavior, I want to say attitude garbage that you get out of kids from the government schools.
Right.
They're happier. They're better balanced. They're definitely more intelligent and mature. And we're talking about people from all different locations and walks of life and different origins and everything else. So you can't just say, oh, well, that's just, that's just because of that group in that particular area there. No, these are people from all over the place. And quite frankly, I do believe that what is going to advance libertarianism, anarchism, voluntarism is providing a generation, the next generation, the following generations that are going to reject the state and take it further than the minds of those that came before them.
Right.
The ideas are going to continue, but they're also going to expand and improve. You know, people talk about Rothbard. Yeah, Rothbard brought up a lot of really good things, but you know what? He didn't get everything right, and he also didn't answer a whole lot of stuff.
Of course.
I mean, Rothbard died in 1993. So if you're reading about Rothbard's advice on how to get a direct action group together, you're going to be reading about phone trees and everything else.
Right, exactly.
Well,
You're not going to get social media advice. Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, phone trees have been replaced with group text messaging.
Right.
You know, they're gonna be talking about, you know, sending out faxes to each other.
Right, exactly.
So, but anyway, by raising future generations of children that are smarter than the status and definitely more well balanced, because me personally, I look at, maybe this is me just getting older, but I look at the de-evolution of American society to this rage. And it's not just the social justice warriors that are immature children freaking out over everything. It's the cultural justice warriors too.
Yep.
So it's left and right are mirror images of each other, and they only vary in the things that they freak out over, and not even by that much. And quite frankly, you'd be lucky to get a cigarette paper in between the two of them. That's how close they are.
Yeah.
But anyway, you got Dana Martin. She's talking about the things that she does. Jim Cunningham was there, and he was talking about things like the Milgram experiment. So understanding human behavior in some regards.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, Jeffrey Tucker came out, and Jeffrey Tucker, what's really wonderful about him is the hope that he gives you for the future, and talking about how technology changes things. You know, it's really amazing that with technology, humans are able to do these things. You know, we talked about earlier. With technology, you don't die from a bug bite anymore.
Right,
you don't die from a broken leg. But there's so much more. I mean, the productivity. And you look at the 3D printer. What is done with 3D printer and milling machines today?
Yep.
It used to require a big giant machine shop, and now somebody could set up in their garage or their basement, for that matter.
Yep.
And these are just some of the speakers. I mean, there's a lot more speakers there, but the people that you meet and the things that they know, the ideas that they have, and it's not just about going there to go swimming and eat at the assault kitchen, which, don't get me wrong, eating at the assault kitchen is something that I recommend for everybody, because you know,
I need to visit the assault kitchen one day. Yeah.
That's how I finance the trip, is by vending food, vending dinners and breakfasts. But the fact that you can sit down with all these people and you can exchange ideas on how to be a little bit more free. You can talk about things that you could do to take the tyranny out of your life, and how you can increase your own liberty one piece at a time. And by going around talking to these people and taking all this information home and putting it into use, and then meeting other people, you know, I can't even tell you how many times I've had a conversation with somebody and they went with the statist Overton window thing of, well, I'm not happy with this, so I wish that there was just a tiny bit less tyranny.
Right.
Well, how about no tyranny?
Yeah.
You know, it's like the people that they're angry that marijuana is illegal, so they say legalize it, regulate it, and tax it.
Tax it, and we can, exactly,
yeah. And what they fail to realize is that the early marijuana prohibitions were exactly that. It was legal, but it was taxed and regulated.
Right.
And it was taxed and regulated in a way that if you possessed it without the tax stamp, you would get arrested, and you had to take it to the place to get the tax stamp in order to get the tax stamp.
Right.
So if you transported it to get the tax stamp without the tax stamp, you would get arrested.
The law. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So they didn't outright prohibit it. They just made it illegal or they made it impossible to have.
Right. Exactly.
So that's legalized, tax, and regulate. Now, if we change cannabis over to guns, let's say they implement all these different permits and all these different taxes, and you can still have gun owners. You can still have your Second Amendment. You just can't own a gun.
Right. Yeah.
Because in order to follow all this taxation and regulation, and of course we can't just let anybody have a gun, right?
Right.
Common
sense gun control.
Yeah, I don't know. No, it's responsible gun ownership if you're conservative.
Oh, yeah.
So because conservatives don't want absolutely zero restrictions on gun ownership. No, they just want a different type of tyranny.
Yeah.
They don't mind Obamacare when Trump is implementing it. If the individual mandate gets the name changed to the patriotic compliance requirement, they'll be all over it.
America First Healthcare.
Yes. Yes. You give something a patriotic name and Republicans will embrace any Democratic program.
Right.
And that is the history. So going back to Liberty Fest, you can meet all these different people and they know things. And you can take this information home and you can add it to your repertoire and you can expand on it and you can meet other people that maybe they're a little bit disgruntled. Maybe they don't really know why they're angry, but they know that they are angry.
Right.
And maybe you can plant some seeds and from there, maybe somebody else is born. Or at the very least, you can get a little bit of your own freedom back.
Right. Well, Lou, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you being on my inaugural Virgin show and going through this with me. So your website is lousander.com, LOUSANDER.com. What else? Where else can people go to find out more about you and your show and Midwest Peace and Liberty Fest and anything else that you'd like to share with them?
Lou Sanders Show basically covers my stuff. You can also go to freedomfiends.com. I'm not on there a whole lot anymore, but there's still a lot of other neat stuff on there that you might enjoy. For the fest, mplfest.org. That's Mike Papa Lima Fest.org. And I'm looking for the YouTube channel. It looks like it's Midwest Peace and Liberty Fest. And I'm only seeing one video uploaded so far. But anyway.
So those are the places people can find you. Perfect. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to hopefully having you on some other time in the future.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure to be had.
Thank you. Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to my first episode of My Fellow Americans. I do promise that in the future, this will be a lot less rough. Hopefully it'll be live. I'll figure out how to stream one day. I am in the process of getting nicer equipment so that I'll be higher resolution and won't have headphones in my ears like we're talking on Skype together. And so that's where I plan to go with this show. I've learned quite a bit even in this first episode. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you share it with others. And I look forward to having you tune into my next episode.
Imagine knowing all that started off that war was pride and lies. Be a man, hold it in your eyes. Take a look up in the sky and count the doves. I believe it's 23. Every breath is every step that I've been blessed to get to breathe. Rather let you rest in praises as opposed to rest in peace. At the least, that's just me being me. Convoluted as can be. In my future, I can view it so vivid and beautifully. The distances I will leap from the man that I used to be. But now, summer doesn't exist anymore. Best case scenario, I get to finish the tour. then chill with the gust in August before I march and march again. Dayquil in April, I know how cold this art can get. My head hurting, I must have a lot on my mind. When I got time on my hands, they put hands on my time. My skin, my friend. In reality, you are my kin, though I view the world through another's iris. If you slide in my kicks, it might fit. We might just unite and come together, become hybrid, at the least slightly like-minded. Indeed, the life I've lived brings light to kindness. All you need is a sign. Put a cease to the crimes. Put an ease to the minds like mine. Sometimes darkness is all I find. You know what they say about an eye for an eye in a time when the blind lead the blind. Who am I to deny I would cry when a loved one dies? I recognize that body outside, but the holes in the body that was alive. Now confined to a chalk outline. Find out how, but you never know why. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. That's my sister, mother, father, brother, son. That's one of mine. All these years I close my eyes, open up to only find I'm in line. There's a pointless murder happening all the time. Either lose your life or mine, caught up in them versus I. That ain't how it started, nah. How were we supposed to survive? There's a war going on outside. Who would want to raise a child? Whom the tomb is flashing by. Now you have to say goodbye when you watch them on the news at 5. Don't tell me how, tell me why.